7,000 people were in that arena, and not one of them spoke a single word for nearly 30 seconds. Not the announcers, not the referees, not the reporters sitting ringside with their pens frozen mid-sentence above their notepads. The footage was never officially released. The organizers made sure of that. But the people who were there, the fighters, the coaches, the journalists, the ordinary fans who had paid $3 for a seat in the upper rows of the Long Beach Memorial Sports Arena, they carried what they witnessed for the rest of their lives. Some of them talked about it in whispers years later. Some of them never spoke about it at all. This is the story of what happened on that night. And to understand it, you have to rewind to 60 hours before, to a private gym in the San Fernando Valley, where a man named Tanaka Hiroshi was preparing to make the biggest mistake of his life. The world did not yet know Bruce Lee's name. He was 23 years old. He was teaching Kung Fu out of a garage in Seattle. He weighed 135 pounds on a good day, and he moved through the world like a quiet current of electricity, something you couldn't quite see, but could feel the moment it was near you. Tanaka Hiroshi was 31. He was a karate champion from Osaka who had come to America 2 years earlier, sponsored by a wealthy Japanese-American businessman who believed that his fighter could single-handedly redefine martial arts in the West. Tanaka stood 6'1". He had shoulders like the doorframe of a bank vault. He had won every regional karate tournament on the West Coast in the past 18 months, usually by the end of the second round. He wore his record like armor. More than that, he wore his size like a weapon. When Tanaka walked into a room, people moved, not because they were told to, but because something in the animal brain registered the width of him, the weight of him, and made a calculation that said, "Give this man space." He had never lost, not once. And in the days before the 1964 Long Beach International Karate Championships, his trainer, a scarred Korean veteran named Baek, had been feeding him a specific story about the event's exhibition roster. There was a young Chinese American on the card, Baek said, a nobody, a performer, some kid from Hong Kong who had studied under a Wing Chun teacher and was apparently going to demonstrate something he called the 1-inch punch. Tanaka had laughed, not a full laugh, a short, dismissive sound through the nose. 1 inch. He had broken 3 men's ribs in sparring. He fought from a fighting stance so wide and grounded it looked like the earth itself couldn't move him. He had arms that could generate force from 2 feet away without effort. 1 inch. He asked Baek what the kid weighed. Baek told him. Tanaka laughed again. This time it reached his eyes. The Long Beach International Karate Championships were not small. This was the premier martial arts event in America. Fighters from 12 countries, styles from across Asia, Europe, South America. The audience was a mix of serious martial artists, curious civilians, and a handful of Hollywood types who had begun to take an interest in the Eastern arts. Ed Parker, the Hawaiian-born Kenpo master who organized the event, had built it into something almost mythological in the American martial arts world. He had a gift for spectacle. He understood that a crowd needed a story, not just a fight. He had put Bruce Lee on the exhibition card specifically to create a contrast. Parker had seen Bruce Lee demonstrate. He had stood in a backyard in Los Angeles and watched this young man move and felt something he couldn't name, something close to awe and close to fear, and maybe something older than both. He put him on the card. He told a few people. Word spread the way word always spreads in small, tight communities, in pieces, growing slightly with each retelling. By the day before the event, there were fighters in the locker rooms who had heard that someone was going to demonstrate a punch that could move a man's body with the power from 1 inch of distance. Most of them didn't believe it. Tanaka, specifically, wanted to see it fail. He told Baek the night before he was going to volunteer. He was going to stand there. He was going to let the kid try. And when nothing happened, when the punch landed like a tap and the crowd laughed, Tanaka was going to make sure everyone in that arena understood the difference between a performer and a fighter. He had already rehearsed the moment in his head, the casual smile, the slow turn to the audience, the shrug. Is that all? He went to sleep confident. He did not sleep well, but he told himself that was normal. That was just pre-event energy. The Long Beach Memorial Sports Arena smelled like floor polish and anticipation. By 10 in the morning, vendors were setting up outside. Inside, the floor was marked with competition rings, and fighters were moving through warm-ups in clusters, each group carrying the particular intensity of their style, the rigid, controlled explosions of traditional karate, the fluid, rolling preparation of judo practitioners, the loose, unpredictable rhythms of the kung fu style scattered here and there like jazz musicians at a classical concert. Bruce Lee arrived without ceremony. No entourage, no assistant carrying bags. He came in wearing dark slacks and a plain collared shirt, carrying a small case. His friend and student Doug Palmer was with him, and a few others who had come to help with the demonstration setup. He was not tall. He did not have the body that made rooms rearrange themselves. But
But something happened when he walked through a space that was difficult to explain later and nearly impossible to describe in the moment. People's eyes went to him. They didn't know why. They would look away and then look back. There was a quality to the way he moved, a completeness, a total absence of wasted motion that registered somewhere below conscious awareness. Several fighters watched him cross the floor and said nothing, but they watched. Tanaka watched from the far side of the arena, his arms folded, his expression flat and unreadable. He watched the young man set up, watched the assistant place a wooden board, not to break, but a board for the volunteer to hold, to demonstrate the force transfer of the punch. Watched Bruce Lee warm up, rolling his shoulders, shaking his hands loose. Tanaka leaned to Bake. "He's small," he said in Japanese. Bake agreed. Neither of them said anything else, but both of them were watching. And the watching had a quality that was different from dismissal. It was the watching of men who had spent their lives learning to read other bodies, who had been in enough dangerous rooms to know that sometimes the information your eyes send you and the information your instincts send you are not the same. Tanaka's instincts were sending him something. He chose not to listen. The afternoon session opened with traditional competition. The crowd was loud, engaged, enthusiastic. Fighters competed with the controlled precision of the sport. Points called by referees, bows exchanged, the formal architecture of competition keeping everything in its proper shape. Tanaka competed early. He won his match in under 4 minutes, a powerful Gyakuzuki to the midsection, controlled but devastating even in its restrained form. The man across from him absorbed it and went down to one knee, and the referee stepped in immediately. The crowd applauded. Tanaka bowed to his opponent, to the judges, to the crowd. He walked off the mat with the specific economy of a man who had done this many times and expected to keep doing it. He positioned himself near the front, to the right of the central exhibition space for the exhibition portion. Ed Parker took the microphone. He introduced Bruce Lee the way a skilled showman introduces something he knows is about to be extraordinary, with understatement. "We have a young man here today," Parker said, "who has been developing something he's calling Jeet Kune Do, a new approach to martial arts. He's going to show you a few things, and then he's going to show you something that I'm going to let him explain for himself." Bruce Lee stepped into the space. The crowd gave him polite applause. He was 23 years old. He weighed 135 pounds. He stood 5'7" in his shoes. He smiled at the crowd. Easy, unforced. He began to speak.
His voice was different from what people expected. Accented, yes, but precise. He chose his words with the same economy he applied to everything. Nothing wasted, nothing performed for its own sake. He talked about efficiency, about how most martial arts, he said with enormous respect for their traditions, had drifted towards ceremony, toward the performance of power rather than power itself. He said this without arrogance. He said it as an observation. The body does not care about style, he said, only about what works. A few people in the crowd shifted, traditional karate practitioners, proud of their styles, a low murmur. He acknowledged it immediately. "I trained in Wing Chun. I have studied everything I could find. I respect the traditions, but I also believe that truth has no style." He paused. "I want to show you something today. It is not magic. It is not a trick. It is physics. And it is what happens when you remove everything between intention and impact." He turned to his assistant. He described the 1-inch punch. He explained it clinically, clearly, the mechanics of hip rotation, the torque generated from the ground up through the kinetic chain, the way conventional fighting wisdom assumed you needed distance to generate force, and why that assumption was wrong. Then he asked for a volunteer. He wanted someone to hold the board. He wanted someone who was not easily moved, someone the crowd would believe. He looked across the room. Tanaka was already stepping forward. The crowd reacted to Tanaka the way crowds react to size, appreciatively, with relief. Here was a man whose physical reality made the test feel real. If this giant could not be moved, then the experiment was valid, and many in the crowd expected exactly that result. Tanaka walked slowly into the demonstration space. He was smiling, the composed, easy smile of a man who believed completely in the outcome of what was about to happen. He positioned himself. His assistant handed him the board. He held it at chest height, braced back on his rear foot, grounded like a tree that had grown into the arena floor. The crowd murmured appreciatively. Tanaka looked at Bruce Lee. And then, quietly, so that only the people in the first 2 rows could hear it clearly, though it rippled back through the crowd in whispers over the following weeks, he said something. What exactly he said has been reported differently by different witnesses. Some said it was in Japanese and that the translation was roughly, "Go ahead, little man." Some said he said it in English. Some said it was cruder than that, a dismissal, a mockery, an invitation wrapped in contempt. What everyone who was close enough agrees on is this. He smiled when he said it.
The easy, unthreatened smile of a man who already knew how this ended. Bruce Lee looked at him. Not through him. Not past him. At him. For a moment, and witnesses reported this moment lasting somewhere between 1 second and an eternity, which tells you something about how time moves in charged rooms. Bruce Lee was simply still. Not the stillness of uncertainty. The stillness of absolute calm before absolute motion. His right hand was extended, fist formed, knuckles 1 inch from the surface of the board that Tanaka held against his chest. The crowd stopped breathing.
That is not a fighting distance. That is not a punching distance. That is the distance between two people standing close enough to whisper. Tanaka held the board steady. His feet were planted. His knees were bent. His entire body, 220 pounds of trained, conditioned, tournament-hardened muscle, was set like concrete. He had absorbed punches from men who could move refrigerators. He was not afraid of 1 inch. Bruce Lee exhaled. Not dramatically, not for the crowd, just a single, quiet breath. And then something happened that the human eye was not fast enough to process in real time. The fist moved. Later, much later, when people tried to describe it, they reached for the wrong words first. Blur was the word that came out most often, but blur implies something moving through space that you can almost see, almost track. This was not that. This was the board being in one position and then the force arriving and there being no visible metal. The board cracked. That part was audible. Sharp, clean, the percussive snap of dense wood giving way. But Tanaka Hiroshi, 6'1", 220 pounds, undefeated, immovable, he left the ground. Not a stumble, not a backward shuffle of the feet, he left the ground. His rear foot came up first, then his lead foot, and he traveled. Witnesses at ringside estimated between 4 and 6 feet, though the estimates vary because no one was watching with a measuring tape. They were watching with their mouths open and their brains scrambling to update what they understood about physics. He traveled backward through the air and landed in the folding chair that had been placed behind him as a safety measure. The chair collapsed under the impact. Tanaka sat in the wreckage of it. He was not unconscious, that is important to say. He was awake, he was breathing, he was looking up at the ceiling of the Long Beach Memorial Sports Arena with the specific expression of a man whose entire model of the world has just been revised in under half a second. 3 seconds passed. Nobody moved. Not Tanaka, not his trainer Beck, who was standing 6 feet to the left with his hand raised halfway to his mouth, not the referees, not the fighters in the competition rings who had stopped their own warm-ups to watch and now stood frozen in the interrupted postures of preparation, not the journalists, not Ed Parker, who had seen this demonstration before and had still, in this moment, forgotten to breathe. 7,000 people. Silence. The crowd breaks. It started somewhere in the upper rows. A single sound. Not a cheer exactly, more like the involuntary noise a person makes when they see something that their mind cannot immediately file, and then it spread. Fast. The way fire spreads through dry grass when the wind catches it right. The arena erupted. Not politely, not with the measured appreciation of a martial arts audience trained to respect ceremony and controlled demonstration. This was something rawer than that. This was the sound of 7,000 people responding to something they had never seen and would never fully be able to explain. People were standing. Men who had spent careers studying combat, who had seen every kind of striking art, who had trained their bodies to absorb force and their minds to be unmoved by spectacle. They were standing and making noise like children who had just witnessed something impossible. Bruce Lee did not celebrate. He turned to face Tanaka, who was being helped to his feet by 2 people. He gave a small, respectful bow. Precise. Genuine. Not a performance bow. Not a victor's bow. The bow of a man who understood that what had just happened was not personal. It was not humiliation. It was a demonstration. And the demonstration had nothing to do with Tanaka specifically. Tanaka had simply been the most credible volunteer in the room, and his presence had made the truth of the thing undeniable. Tanaka accepted the bow. It took him a moment. There was something working itself out behind his eyes. The reordering of things. The dismantling of a certainty that had been load-bearing in his understanding of himself. But he bowed back. And in that moment, several people who were watching closely felt something that they later described as more moving than the punch itself. Because the punch was extraordinary. But the bow, both bows, were something older. Something that had nothing to do with winning, and everything to do with truth. The demonstration ended 20 minutes later. Bruce Lee showed several other things. The speed of his kicks, the way he could shift angles without telegraphing, a 2-finger push-up,
balanced on the thumb and index finger of one hand that made the crowd lose its mind again. But everyone in that arena already knew they had seen the thing. The main thing. The moment they would carry out of the building like something precious. Backstage, in the hallway behind the competition floor, where fighters rested between bouts and trainers wrapped hands, and the fluorescent lighting made everyone look slightly unreal, Tanaka sat on a bench. Beck sat next to him, saying nothing, which was the right choice. Tanaka's chest was sore. Not injured, he would confirm this later, to the few people he trusted enough to discuss it with. Sore. The kind of sore that comes from force transferred cleanly through the sternum and into the body behind it. He sat for a long time. A younger fighter, a student from a local dojo, maybe 19 years old, full of the nervous energy of competition day, came around the corner and stopped when he saw Tanaka sitting there. The kid had seen the demonstration. His eyes went to Tanaka's face and then away, uncertain of the etiquette. Tanaka looked at him. "Did you see it?" Tanaka asked. His English was accented but precise. The kid nodded. "Good," Tanaka said. "Remember it." He said nothing else. The kid moved on. Beck looked at Tanaka. Tanaka was quiet for another moment. Then he said in Japanese, "I moved wrong." Beck waited. "I set myself as if I was receiving a full punch. I prepared for distance force." He paused. "He did not give me distance force. He gave me something I have no name for." Beck said, "Do you want to find out how it works?" Tanaka thought about it. "It would take years," he said. "Yes," Beck said. Tanaka said nothing else for a while, but the expression on his face had changed. The certainty that had lived there, the armor of his record, his size, his undefeated history, it had not shattered. It had simply become something more complicated, something more honest. By that evening, the story was already moving. Martial artists talked then the way people talk now, through networks, through phone calls, through letters, through the tight community channels of gyms and dojos and training halls, and the story that moved through those channels in the weeks after Long Beach was not a clean story. It grew, it bent, it accumulated details that may or may not have been present in the original event. Some versions said the chair had broken. It had. Some versions said Tanaka had been knocked unconscious. He had not. Some versions said there were only 20 people in the room. There were 7,000. Some versions said the footage existed, that someone had filmed the demonstration on a real camera, and the film had been quietly acquired and buried by parties who had a financial interest in not having the world see what happened to a 220-pound karate champion when a 135-pound kid hit him from 1 inch away. The footage question is one that has never been fully resolved. What is certain is this: no clear film record of the demonstration in its full context was ever publicly released. What is also certain is that in the months after Long Beach, something shifted in the American martial arts world. Teachers began to ask different questions. Not what style is best, but what actually works. Students began to cross style lines in ways they hadn't before. The rigid walls between disciplines, the territorial certainties that had governed American martial arts, began, very slowly, to develop cracks. And at the center of every one of those conversations, in every gym and dojo and training hall where the new questions were being asked, was the name of a 23-year-old from Hong Kong who weighed 135 pounds. No one challenged him again at Long Beach, not that day. The invitation was open. It stayed open. Nobody took it. This part of the story is not widely told. In the spring of 1965, Tanaka Hiroshi quietly withdrew from the regional karate competition circuit. His trainer back told people he was recovering from a minor injury. This was not entirely false. Tanaka had strained a shoulder in training. But it was not the whole truth either. The whole truth was that Tanaka had spent the 6 months since Long Beach doing something he had never seriously done before. He had been studying. Not karate. He already knew karate in the way that a man knows his own language, completely, unconsciously, without having to think about it. He had been studying everything else. Wing Chun, Judo, the writings that were beginning to circulate about the philosophy behind Jeet Kune Do, the physics of force transfer. He returned to competition in late 1965. He fought differently. He won. He kept winning. But people who knew him from before said he was different. More patient. Less dependent on his size. There were moments in his fighting now where he did something unexpected. An angle change, a timing shift, a way of using less to achieve more. That didn't come from karate. Nobody asked him where it came from. He never explained. But Back told one person, years later, in a different city, in a different decade, that Tanaka kept a photograph on the wall of his training space. Not of himself, not of a trophy or a championship moment. A photograph from a newspaper. Black and white, slightly blurred. A small man. A demonstration space. 7,000 people that the photograph couldn't contain. Beck said Tanaka looked at it before every training session. He said that was all he needed to say about what happened at Long Beach.
Bruce Lee was not trying to prove he was better than Tanaka. This is the part that people miss when they tell the story as a story of victory. He was 23 years old and he was trying to prove something about truth, about the way that tradition, any tradition, however noble, however earned, can calcify into dogma if it isn't tested. He was trying to demonstrate that the gap between what we believe and what is actually real can be closed, that honesty about your limits is not weakness, that a system built on genuine understanding of how the body works will always, in the end, be more powerful than a system built on the performance of power. He had been told his whole life that he was too small. In Hong Kong, training under Ip Man, he had been questioned. In Seattle, when he began teaching, he had been challenged. Students came wanting to test the small Chinese-American instructor. He turned none of them away. He tested everything on himself first. That was his method. He did not ask a principle to be true in the abstract. He tested it on his own body, against resisting partners, under pressure, until he knew, not believed, knew whether it held. The 1-inch punch held. It held because it was built on physics, not faith, because it did not require you to believe in it for it to work, because the body does not care about conviction, only about mechanics. He said once in an interview that people would quote for decades, "I fear not the man who has practiced 10,000 kicks once, but I fear the man who has practiced one kick 10,000 times." But there was a deeper version of the same thought that he carried through Long Beach and through everything that came after. It was this: absorb what is useful, discard what is useless, add what is essentially your own. Not a style, not a tradition, not a system, a process. An ongoing, honest, relentless process of finding out what is actually true about force and speed and the human body, and then removing everything that is not that. That is what left Tanaka Hiroshi in a collapsed folding chair. Not size, not rage, not pride. Truth, delivered from 1 inch away. The 1964 Long Beach International Karate Championships would later be described by martial arts historians as a turning point. Not because of the competition, not because of the record set or the styles showcased, because of 20 minutes in the middle of the afternoon when a 23-year-old nobody stepped into an exhibition space and quietly rewrote what the people in that room thought was possible. Bruce Lee went on to become the most recognizable martial artist in the history of the world. Films, philosophy, a body of work that has influenced combat sports, acting, physical training, and the philosophy of self-mastery for 60 years. But the people who were at Long Beach, the ones who saw it before the movies, before the fame, before the mythology, they always said the same thing. He was already exactly that. Not almost, not on his way to being, not a promise of something that would later arrive. He was already completely, entirely himself. 135 pounds of the most honest understanding of force and speed and the human body that any person had assembled in the history of striking arts. And he stood in front of 7,000 people and demonstrated it at a distance of 1 inch. The chair is gone. The arena has been renovated and renamed and renovated again. Tanaka Hiroshi retired from competition in 1971. He became a teacher. His students, by all accounts, were excellent. Bruce Lee died in 1973. He was 32 years old. But in every gym, in every dojo, in every training hall in the world where a student is being told that size determines power, in every room where a person is being told that what they have is not enough, there is an answer. It has been available since 1964. It arrived from 1 inch away. And it landed.